To Alpha. Today we have a presence grace with Jason Clarke from Close Range Tactics. He's got kind of an interesting perspective that he's going to share with us. We're going to find out how he got to where he is and what he's doing with himself. Jason, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Excellent. We'll just kick this off. What's the origin story?
The origin of Close Range Tactics?
Well, of you personally, like were you in some type of Marvel-esque disaster in which you were bit by something radioactive, or did you just get picked on and had your feet hurt?
I'd probably say my relationship with violence started very young. It was just a case that's it's unfortunate. It happens all too often. Just being brought up in a violent home, and as well as a violent neighborhood for a while, and you just sort of develop what I call a spidey sense for those sorts of situations. And at some point in time, I realized that was unique to me compared to most of the people I was hanging out with as an adult. And then I realized they didn't grow up like I did. So I realized something was different there. But
if you don't mind me asking, what neck of the woods was that, Jason?
As far as like where I was at when I was growing up.
Where did you grow up? What was the general locale? You don't need to get specific, but.
Oh man, it was the bottom of the drain. I was down in Florida.
Are you actually from Florida? Because everyone I met in Florida always moved to Florida from somewhere else.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, everybody moves to Florida, it seems. I don't know. That's why I call it the drain, they all wind up down there. No offense. Actually, my wife is from Florida, so. But no, I did not. I was not born there. I just wound up there through divorces. Like my parents were divorced when I was very young, so just kind of wound up there, kind of in the late 70s through the 80s. So prime time, and just not good circumstances, not good neighborhoods. Growing up watching Bruce Lee movies and getting into fights and things like that. And just realizing that in the situation that I was in, I felt being trained or learning martial arts, basically trying to become a little bit like Bruce Lee is what I needed in my life to kind of protect myself. I didn't really know what I was doing, but that's where it all started.
So at what point did you realize that you weren't 110 pounds in Asian? About how far into your martial arts career did you realize that maybe I am not kicking over my head?
That was when I had one of my first fights was a weapons fight with nunchucks. And actually, I just told this story to Craig Douglas a couple months ago, and he's like, he's the one who's telling me you got to tell that story. I was really, like I said, into Bruce, into the nunchucks, and my neighbor was some 20-something-year-old guy, and he was into nunchucks, and he could make them. He had some carpentry blueprint or whatever on how to make them, and he made me a pair, and they were okay. They're cool, but they weren't like those really nice ones that you buy at a store that have the chain, the real legit ones. And in the neighborhood that I was growing up in, it was very segregated racially, and I wasn't really supposed to stray too far out of the area that I was in, which I guess was the white trash area. I don't know. Some Asian kids drive by or ride by on their or on their bicycle, and they see me out in the yard working my nunchucks. And I'm about, I don't know.
They were upset about cultural appropriation. I understand.
I don't think we were really too worried about that in like 1970, 1980. Yeah, 79, 80, somewhere around there. I was about 6 years old. And so what they told me was that their brother had a really cool pair of nunchucks, and if I would follow them down to where they lived, he would show them to me. And so I disobeyed all the rules, and I jumped on my bike. I went down there. I brought my nunchucks, and it's one of those Florida sort of duplex, not really duplex. It was like two side-by-side apartments with a courtyard. And I go there, and all they run around, and they start telling all the neighbors, and everybody comes out into the courtyard to watch what's about to happen. And this like 13-year-old kid comes out with his nunchucks. And I think they told him that I was challenging him to a fight, but I didn't understand what they were saying. I thought I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know we were going to hit each other with them.
You thought it was just going to be like a dance-off or what?
Exactly. That's exactly what I thought. Like, at the time, I don't think we knew what a dance-off was, but I thought it was like, show me your moves and I'll show you mine. You know, like something like that. I didn't know what was about to happen, because all I'd ever
getting it served up pretty good then, I guess.
Oh man, I got clobbered. Like literally, I think that was my first fight with another person that I remember. It was a nunchuck fight, and I got clobbered upside the head and the body a few times, and then I just ran out of there. And thankfully, I grabbed my bike. He didn't work me over too hard or anything like that, but yeah, everybody laughed, and I was running out of there. I learned pretty quick about what it was all about with that stuff.
How many different systems have you studied, or what have been the biggest influences? Like, are you really into the Tai Chi? Has that really paid off for you, or flash dance, or what?
No. I would say it's pretty obvious I'm grappling centric. I'm built for it, and I've put the most time of study into it, starting with wrestling in middle school. And I was never really I wasn't an outstanding athlete or anything like that, but grappling somehow came more naturally than other things. I started with karate first as a kid, and then I dabbled in Muay Thai for a few years after that. And probably about sixth grade, or grade 6, as they say in Canada, I started wrestling.
And that was freestyle, Greco, folk?
It was freestyle.
Okay. It's great base.
And back then, yeah, we were doing freestyle. I think we were. I think now they're doing more folk style. But anyway, not Greco. And then there was a lag there where I didn't really wrestle in high school. I just did the middle school portions. And when I was in the military, in the early 90s, that's when I got hooked up with the Gracies. And I started Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and I think it was 1994, maybe 95, 94, 95, somewhere around UFC number 2. And I started under Helson Gracie. And then about the time, there's more to the story of that, but while I was in jiu-jitsu, I started judo, and then got my black belt in judo. So I'm very grappling centric, but I do have striking components, but I'm not a high level, boxer or kickboxer or anything like that.
Well, if you have good judo, I mean, science vast over tea kettle, right? Like, right? If you send someone flying through the air and they land on asphalt, they aren't typically too motivated to proceed. So It can definitely be made to work. What three throws did you play the most for your judo, or have you found have carried over for you?
Competition in judo, my setups or my little system that I liked the most was obviously Ippon Sayanagi, which is high percentage throw for a Western, judoka. Most judokas are going to throw Ippon Sayanagi at some point in time. That was my base throw, and then off of that, I liked Kataguruma, usually drop style Kataguruma, and I fell in love with Sorisura Komagoshi. Just dealing with those bastards where you can't break their grips. It's like, well, I guess it's Sodi for you. So those are my three that I really liked.
So just to translate that, we have a shoulder throw, and then you said you had Kataguruma, so that's the fireman's, a variant of a fireman's.
Yeah.
And then the last one was what is the equivalent to that most people be able to pronounce?
I would say it's a double sleeve grip throw. Right, you're holding on to the both sleeves of your opponent, and you use that to throw them. And
is it over the hip like over the hip, but your lateral, almost like a hip toss in Aikido?
You can throw it like a hip throw. You can throw it with your hip. You can throw it drop style as well on your knees, which is what I usually, I chose. I like the drop styles. It's just so much easier to throw somebody drop style. But it's really scary to receive that throw because you can't break fall. Your hands are all tied up, and so you just got to eat it.
And so from the judo flavor, what was it you found transitioned the best into mixing it up in more of a street-based altercation? Because one of the big criticisms people make at judo is, oh well, the cloth isn't necessarily there. It isn't strong enough to leverage somebody the same way. So did you find that you had to adjust a lot of what you were doing, or were you just like throwing a lot of a sotogari, which is the giant backwards trip for those of you that don't speak the Japanese?
Yeah. I got into judo because of the problems I had with the gi and jujitsu. My wrestling background, my double legs and my shots. If someone could grab a hold of my cloth, my gi jacket, it made it very difficult to do a shot. And so I was a 4-stripe blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu before I even started judo. And I did it for that express reason. It was like, competitively, my wrestling was getting shut down. And so I joined a judo club and started like doing double training, throughout the week. And what I've realized since I've become an instructor, I spend the majority of my time where there's snow in the winter, and a good percentage of the year people are wearing clothes where you can use it just like a judo jacket, or jiu-jitsu gi. Your Carhartts, your North Face fleeces, your hoodies, most of those things are going to work well, but we're not so naive that we don't understand that some people are wearing clothes that will rip if we grab them. So we focus on grappling and those sorts of things without using the cloth. You can modify a judo throw for no-gi. I mean, you can watch Carol Parisian and Ronda Rousey. Those are some judokas that have translated it well to MMA. And you can go to almost any no-gi jiu-jitsu tournament and watch guys that are good at judo translate their throws. So it's not as polarized as people think. There's people actually think about these things, and there's some of us that we've come up with, t-shirt chokes and tank top chokes, and we can figure out a way to choke you with your, your silk little shirt, you know, and I don't even need it. Like, it's not like I need the gi at a, you know, at a certain point, you just don't need it.
Yeah. And you wind up having those principles that you just use to carry over. Excellent. So you have what ranking in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under whom right now?
I am a first degree black belt under Saulo Ribeiro.
That is no joke. That man is very skilled, and a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a legit black belt, is nothing to sneeze at all. And how far along did you wind up getting in judo?
I am a first dan in judo. I'm one of those guys where, you know, I just opened my academy right about the same time I got my first dan, and priorities of running my academy sort of derailed my pursuit of higher rank through judo. But I do have an academy, and I do teach judo in my academy, not as a judo dojo, but I teach the techniques, and I have judokas that come train with me as my students. And so I've got people who are good at judo in my academy, so we can keep our skills pretty tight. But I'm not very happy with the way the rules of sport judo have gone over the years, especially since they got away from, you know, being able to touch the legs and grab the legs. I think it's moving into the land of preposterousness, and I don't really feel it's worth pursuing as a sport. I'm not interested in it anymore as a sport because of those rules.
I want to find the same thing. You wound up having a lot of guys dancing towards you on one foot, and then you just take their leg and dump them, and then you'd wind up losing the point, and it didn't make sense. A lot of guys just gaming it. I can definitely appreciate that position where you look at when guys were playing the Kodokan 67, right, where you had Hani Basami, you had everything, and now it's just been castrated. Completely agree with you. And so you would say that freestyle wrestling, jiu-jitsu, and judo, that is what the base is for you, augmented with being a bit of a dirty savage when it's required?
Yeah, I prefer to be a dirty savage above all else. I don't. I think rules are. I mean, they're nice. You know, rules are there for a reason, but I don't hang my hat on any particular rule set, and IBJJF included. You know, I like to think that, you know, my Greco-Roman wrestling is coming along and is more of an influence on me now than freestyle or folk style really ever was. You know, I did some MMA work really, really early on. Like I was basically a white belt when I started. You know, I did a couple of fights, but nothing like what it is now, where it's sanctioned and professional. This is just like a tough man contest at a bar, and they decided to make it no rules, and so we could grapple. I had 6 months of jiu-jitsu, so I won. You know, that was it. Nothing like now. I was never a professional MMA fighter. I think folk style freestyle benefits the sport athlete, you know, really well. The techniques translate. I try to keep in mind the cement factor, and so I like to try to find techniques that will work in those environments. So not shooting double legs on concrete, you know, and doing drop knees, Sayanagis on concrete, you know, things like that, trying to modify things for the hard surfaces.
So how is it that you train? Like you said, you prefer the no rules environment, and I'm assuming that's specifically for self-defense. How is it that you found you can effectively train people to do that so they can perform under pressure and they're still going through and taking those objectives, whether it's punching someone with a beanbag or just adding that dirty stuff in? How is it that you're actually able to get the student to do that when they need to, versus we don't do that because we're friends. And then we have all those repetitions of avoiding that for something that is acceptable. How do we kind of bridge that gap?
I have an integrated system where I think the answer to your question, it has several layers. The first is the content of what you teach people and what your goals are. My goals for myself as an instructor are that my blue belts could survive 5 minutes with anybody. That's my goal. And that's my standard. Most people aren't going to get past blue belts, so that's kind of where I draw my first line in the sand. Like, if you can get to here, it's my opinion that you can survive. Now, what's going to happen, at 5 minutes and 1 second? Are you going to get wiped out? I don't know. But it's sort of an arbitrary standard that I have. And it's based off of the fundamental system that I have in my academy of jiu-jitsu. And when white belts come to my academy and they start learning the fundamentals of my jiu-jitsu, they don't really know it, but they're learning jiu-jitsu that supports grappling with a weapon. I've taken what I can identify as being jiu-jitsu techniques that would support grappling with a firearm or a knife, and they also translate well to grappling in a sport environment. So the only difference that would really change would be the intent of the grappler. So if the situation is such that I'm going to escape side control, well, I'm going to do if I'm in a self-defense situation, my goal is to get to my feet. And all of my white belts know that. Well, but when we compete, we may not want to get to our feet because as a white belt, we may not have a strong takedown game. Maybe we want to play guard because we've got a good triangle from our guard. So instead of getting all the way up to our feet, we'll go up to a certain level, and then we're going to jump guard and try to jump a triangle on them. And they understand that layered approach. They understand that a lot like the force continuum with self-defense, I kind of have a force continuum with my fundamentals. You can dial it. Like, are you defending yourself? Well, then your goal is always to get back to your feet, maintain mobility. But are you competitive? Well, then let's dial it and let's take you to where you're good at. You got a good submission from guard, or do you have a good side control game? And then we'll help you find a way to get you there. But the principle behind the move is the same. So when that person decides that they're going to start grappling with a weapon, they already know all the grappling maneuvers. All I got to do is put a tool in their belt, and then teach them the timing on when they need to pull that tool out. They got it. It's all there already. So then, as far as we take it to the real level or induce stress, well, we run evolutions a lot. Like, I'm very inspired by Craig Douglas and Shivworth and how he runs evolutions. And I have this helmet in my academy. We're going to put on the helmets. We're going to create stressful situations, and we're going to bang it out. And the proof is the pudding.
Mr. Douglas's old hat had a chance to correspond with him a little bit, as well as putting out just wonderful material. A real gentleman. I haven't had the chance to train with him directly, but nothing but respect for what he's doing.
He's a fancy dresser too. If you follow his stuff there, yeah. Well,
I've heard stories from the people that have had to take him shopping. Love you, Mr. Douglas. Please don't hurt me.
He's hopefully, if all goes well, he'll be back in my neck of the woods at my academy in the fall. I had him this past fall, and we had a great time doing his edge weapons overview. And it was a privilege and an honor to be able to host him because that's becoming very rare these days, and his schedule's limited. Um, and his 2019 schedule is going to be very limited as well. I I understand that I believe I made the cut for 2019. My fingers are crossed that that's still true, and I hope to see him here in Iowa in the fall. So if anybody wants to come down, um, you know,
What neck of woods specifically are you in Iowa?
I my academy is in Iowa City, which is where the University of Iowa is located.
Perfect. So how is it? Actually, I guess the first question is, um, besides Mr. Douglas, who have you seen, and yourself, obviously, playing this or working in these grappling situations where we're trying to play hide the pickle, where we have to worry about that additional factor, that X factor.
Um, well, well, Craig, and I don't know if you know this or not. Um, he has underneath him a stable of instructors that he has endorsed that follow his template and his philosophies. They all bring their own unique approaches to it, but you have Cecil Birch and Larry Lindman and Paul Sharp. I know I'm forgetting somebody. Oh, you have Chris Fry. That's what I was forgetting. Those are the guys who do a lot of the knife and gun grappling work, along with Craig. And I'd like to point out that they started something that a lot of people don't know about that you should definitely get in on. I kind of call it the Def Jam, and I don't know if that's caught on or not, but it's called Dominating the Entangled Fight. And they had the first one in Chicago a couple of years ago, and it was where you had Cecil Birch, Larry Lindemann, and Paul Sharp all teaching the course at the same time. And it was a weekend-long course on vertical and horizontal entanglements with weapons, and it was awesome. And I was there for the first one, and I think they're on number 3 now. Number 3 is going to be I think it's going to be in Iowa in I think February.
Iowa City at your gym.
I wish. A good friend of mine, Rob Schroning, it's going to be hosted at his place. And he is LHGK. I'll try to find his website while we're sitting here looking. He's going to be hosting Craig. So Rob is over on the west side of Iowa, and he will host ShivWorks and along with other people. So he's a good Iowa resource or Midwest resource. And I am I'm closer to the eastern side of Iowa. So for people in Illinois, near the Mississippi River, I'm a little bit more accessible for ShivWorks stuff and for, grappling with weapons and whatnot. There's other people out there. I believe Jerry Winsel, he's of Red Zone Threat Management, and he's doing a lot of knife work. I'm not sure if he does gun work, but most people do who do knife stuff. Off the top of my head,
I don't know if you've had the pleasure. There's a couple guys at ISR Matrix, Lewis and a fellow named Ray Price, who's a cop out of Reno. They're also pretty high-level jiu-jitsu guys. Ray Price is a straight blast guy, and they have a lot of integration with weapons and just good grappling as well. If you haven't looked into them, they're worth checking out.
Oh, okay, yeah. Paul Sharp, who I mentioned earlier, who's a ShivWorks recognized instructor. He's a straight blast black belt. In fact, all those gentlemen that I listed are black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I think Chris Fry is a brown belt, but I've trained with him. He's a very, very high level, competent brown belt. There's, it's only a matter of time and service, I think, for him. He's a phenomenal instructor. But yeah, lots of black belts getting involved with guns and knives these days.
That's it's about time. It's about time to get some people some know-how that are doing it.
Oh,
So
I'd like to mention while I pulled up his website, if you go to lhgk.us, that's going to be my friend Rob's website for his training company, and he's got a link to his calendar there, and it looks like February 9th through 10th, he's going to be hosting that Dominating the Entangled Fight. It's a ShivWorks collective course. And that's going to be in Council Bluffs, Iowa. So you can get there, and I highly recommend it. Black belt to no belt, it's solid, definitely. And to get those three outstanding instructors in the same room at the same time, that's a hell of a feat. So you don't want to miss it.
we'll have to talk. Possibly, I'll fly out there, and you and I are going to room together, because that sounds like it'd be a hoot.
Yeah.
So just kind of shifting gears a little bit here, Jason. You've gotten a little bit of notoriety on the old Instagram, which is where everyone should be famous. Posting some really good breakdowns from close security TV, CCTV, security camera footage of just looking at what it is. It looks like before it pops off, when it pops off, and just kind of shattering someone's belief that they may be throwing fireballs in a real situation. I'd like to get you going on that. Let's hear about how you got into it and what you draw on. You said a little bit of an interesting growing up.
Yeah, I like I said, I've had a long relationship with violence. I do have a bit of a spidey sense, which is hard to describe. Probably want to read The Gift of Fear and understand a little bit more about that for those who don't feel as if they have it. But for me, what happened was I was coming up with a theory in regards to combat a few years ago, and this theory, after I started training with Craig, and Craig and I had very parallel thinking in some regards. I was a little bit deeper in one aspect. Particularly, I was really wrapped around the axle about space management. I was trying to find concepts that could simplify what combat was and what the goals of combat should be or were. Not what they should be, but what they were, you know. And I was really hung up about space management, and then I started working with Craig and took a course from him, and he was mentioning, about you got to stay conscious, and you got to remain upright, and that's kind of like, after I spent some time thinking about that, that's when I started crystallizing what I turned into. I mean, right now I call them my iron laws of self-defense. Technically, to me, in my mind, they're called the laws of combat. But I wanted to be as user-friendly as possible. I wanted to be very on point with the point I was trying to make, and I was inspired by reading the book by Sapiens. What was his name? Google the Sapiens book here real fast. He's Yuval Noah Harari. He's an Israeli author, and he wrote a book called Sapiens. And in it, he talks about the iron laws of biology and the iron laws of evolution, which are laws that can't be broken. They're not gonna go away. It is what they are. They're set almost. They're better than stone. They're iron. All of that. And it's people what those iron laws were. I went looking for examples, and so that's what started. If you go to the first 3 posts on the feed, they illustrate the 3 laws and the hierarchy. It's not necessarily a hierarchy, because it's kind of it's a matrix. Like, they all support each other, but is to remain conscious because the first law I have. Maintain consciousness, one. And iron law number 2 is to maintain mobility, which is a little different from what Craig says. Craig says remain upright. I say maintain mobility because as we start working with stuff against walls, and I can vertically pin you, it's similar to being the ground. So you could get pinned up against a car wall, or you get, pinned up against any physical surface. I work on like maintain mobility, and then I've got that's always been my big hang up, which is space. And regardless of, I've got a really, really cerebral theory on chaos theory in combat that sort of derives from effectively manage the space, but I don't really want to get into it because it's gonna make me seem like really out there. But these videos were my way of trying to communicate what these laws were. I figured that nobody was really going to give me much notice if I didn't provide examples. So I'm not very good in front of the camera. I don't really have the time either to shoot a bunch of videos. And it's not really genuine for me to create false situations. So I figured I just start applying that sort of template and overlaying it to real encounters, and then discuss how these 3 laws are holding true across many different self-defense scenarios. So that's how it kind of. It's also there's other layers to it. Like I have, I'm using it also as a way to organize my thoughts. So there's some selfishness to it, to the altruism there, where I am trying to educate, but it helps me organize my thoughts. It forces me to organize. I also have some issues with communication. I've been diagnosed as being a high functioning autistic person, or having high functioning autism, and so trying to do voiceover.
You have a black belt in judo and jiu-jitsu. You're probably not going to get teased about being a spurg. I wouldn't worry too much about that.
Actually, you know what? The truth of the matter is, what really was a tipping point for going and getting thoroughly tested in the matter was how miserable I did in Craig Douglas's final evolution in ECQC, where it was a 2 versus 1 social challenge, and I just resorted to hands-on. I couldn't really solve it with my communication skills, and I really got hung up on it, and it really bothered me for a long time, and started putting over the time in between. I spent a couple of years thinking about it, trying to get better, making strides and doing my due diligence to get better at the verbal judo and solving those social conflicts. But that was the one where it made me, because I got to see other people perform. I did it myself, and then I watched others, and there was a clear difference. And I'm like, well, why is that? And I need to know that, because to go hands-on too soon is a bad thing. Even if you're really good at going hands-on, it's not a good thing. So that's what concerned me, and that led me to study more and to eventually find a way to go about getting tested for it. And a lot of people who are in a position like mine with high functioning autism, or you're very close to it, you just have an obsession or a passion about usually one topic. It turns out, mine's violence. I'm very, very interested in it, and like I said, I've been studying it my whole life. So maybe that also helps apply a filter that allows me to see some things that maybe others don't. or at least it gives me a passion to do the analytics on it that others, they see them, but they're not so interested in doing graphic videos and stuff like that, like I am. And it's also like, again, it's self-serving. It's there to provide a therapy for me to communicate better, force myself to do voiceovers or to have a podcast like this, you know?
Yeah, when you start hearing your voice recorded, you start picking up on your own speech patterns, which gets really hilarious. Like, yeah, I said that word that many times in 30 minutes.
Yeah, I've noticed my what there's a term for it, but just your mannerisms, your little habits of.
Yeah,
I mean,
your idiosyncrasies, verbal crutches, all of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Idiosyncrasies, verbal crutches. You know, thankfully, I don't say like 1,000 times, you know, in a conversation. At least I don't think I do. But I have little verbal tics, you know, that I've recognized. My problem tends to be spending too much time trying to find the best word, and I've tried to force myself on several instances on that account to try to do a voiceover within a minute. So I don't get it all in one take, but and I'm not always happy with the result. It's not always as perfect as I would like, but you know, that's just part of my sort of self-help, I guess, in that area.
I guess the nice thing about the Instagram format is you got a minute. That's what you got.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, people, you can do multiples, but you know, people don't tend to swipe. You know, they don't want to watch it all. So
I would say that's 100% accurate. How much of a priority or an emphasis do you place on strength and conditioning as a way to prepare, like, well, both just for like lifestyle, but also as a way to allow you to perform better in those training situations where you're getting in force on force, or if it winds up popping off when you're out at the grocery store in the salad dressing aisle?
you know, I think strength is important. It's certainly going to enhance your whatever technique, whatever, you know, striking, grappling. Strength will enhance your technique. I tend to, as an instructor these days, with a lot of emphasis, you know, I do have a full-time job and I run a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu self-defense academy. It's hard for me to find the time to get in a real solid workout these days. I try to scatter kettlebells about my property. So if I walk by one, I can pick one up and just work it.
Just grease that groove, my friend.
Yeah. This winter, you know, I'm splitting all my own firewood this winter. So I've got a tree that's come down. I'm splitting that by hand. Getting in actual functional training is probably my biggest thing. To just the grip strength that comes from training in the gi is huge, and it really carries over to, if I can get my hand on almost anything, it's going to be very hard to get my hand off of it. And there's really no replacement for functional strength. And so trying to do that, I'm very interested in what Pat McNamara has going on with his combat strength training and all the sandbags and cinder blocks that he throws over his head on the range. That interests me, but I'm more in the wheel.
One of the things, if you look at what old PMAC there is doing, who, if you guys don't know who that is, look up Pat McNamara. If nothing else, he is funny as hell. He's very, very entertaining and does not take himself too seriously at all. But one of the things you'll notice is he's using his slings with his fascial slings. Everything he's doing is all rotational based. A lot of work in the frontal and transverse plane. So a lot of rotational, a lot of lateral stuff. versus just sticking in that sagittal plane that the majority of us work in all the time, which is your bench press, your squat, your deadlift. And so a lot of his stuff is rotational, which translates great into just any type of force generation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's that. Yeah, he's big on that transverse plane. I would say one of my inspirations for working out, like I like the kettlebells, and I like what Steve Maxwell brought to the kettlebell. He was one of the early American pioneers with kettlebells, and he's also a Sala Hibero black belt. I believe I can't remember if he got his black belt from Salo or Helson, but he eventually wound up on the Hibero team. And so he spent a lot of time with us on kettlebells. Like if he would come visit us, he'd work the academy out on some kettlebells. And I've got his 300 workout, which is a brutal kettlebell workout that basically when it's all said and done, you've done 300 repetitions and you've not put the kettlebell down once. And so your grips are fried, your transverse plane's fried, everything's fried. So it's a great endurance workout. And that seems to be where I focus a lot on these days. A little bit more endurance, Tabatas for cardiovascular. I like the Tabatas and the high intensity stuff.
If you'd like a lot of rotational work, I definitely recommend looking into a Bulgarian bag. You can buy a ready-made one, but you can also make one for like $10, $15 with a tire inner tube, some sand.
Right.
It's next level.
Yeah. I've looked at them. I've thought of acquiring some for the academy, I'm really interested in both the sandbag or the do-it-yourself model as well as the commercial models. They both look awesome. I'll probably make my own.
The homemade ones are a great place to start. And all I'll tell you is you should not be starting with more than like 30 pounds because it's very easy for you to do like a tear or something like that or a strain to an intercostal if you're not used to that type of motion. And it's you'll build up to it to doing a lot more. Like I think mine's about 22 kilos now, but start light. 30 pounds may not seem like much. You start moving it in that rotational way and you will know.
You want to translate that 22 kilos to American for me?
Oh, speak American. That is approximately 48 pounds.
48 pounds, yeah. I know. I work in metrics at work.
Speak American.
Yeah.
It's okay. You guys can learn to drink proper strength beer, and I'll learn to get the pounds right.
Yeah.
So what 3 pieces of advice would you give to somebody that is you're never going to see them, right? You're never going to see them. These 3 pieces of advice you'd say, if you follow this, you should be okay. And whether that's looking for a good jiu-jitsu gym in that perspective, whether that's just how not to wind up getting stuck, right? What are those 3 pieces that you'd hand out? Those truth bombs.
Are these like life in general truth bombs?
We'll talk more specifically to that, but if you want to go through and talk some life, we can talk about that too. We'll start with the stuff that's a little more subject related, and then we'll finish off with the advice you give to your 20-year-old self.
Okay. In regards to like all this self-defense stuff, there's so much out there. I guess you'd have to start first with understanding where you're at on the Dunning-Kruger curves, understanding that Dunning-Kruger effect, realizing that there's a lot out there that you don't know, regardless of how long you've been doing it, or one of the things that I'll get told a lot is by because I do have kids classes at my academy, and parents will bring their kids in to train, and dad will be a veteran, and when approached with coming to train with me, will just shrug it off like, nah, I didn't spend 8 years in the Marine Corps to get beat up. They'll say something along those lines. I see a lot of people who assume that whatever skill they were doing transfers, and that there's no more knowledge to be acquired. And that really bums me out in the world of, or in regards to self-defense, because there's absolutely nothing about your infantry career that translates to modern self-defense as a civilian in the United States. It just doesn't. You don't CCW as a grunt. You don't have to. You follow rules of engagement, but they're not the same as a justified use of force, on the city streets of, any town USA. It's different, and there's a lot of different considerations. There's a lot still to learn. So I would say, first and foremost, like, recognize, like, be humble and have humility, regardless of how much of an expert you think you are. I think that's good advice, whether it's self-defense or anything else. When it comes to if you're interested in being an armed civilian, I think it's much easier to teach somebody like a grappler how to do anything in regards to self-defense, because grappling is the worst case scenario.
You think it's much easier to?
Yeah, it's much easier to teach a grappler most things in self-defense, like real-world self-defense with a weapon, just because the worst case scenario, if you're carrying a weapon, is to be entangled, and it's a life or, like, let's just take it to the extreme where it's life or death. You're carrying some sort of weapon on you, so that's kind of bad. Like, there is a weapon involved in this fight, and it could fall out. It could be taken from you. You could bring it out at the wrong time and have it taken away from you. There's a lot of things that could happen. So grappling is probably the worst case scenario for people who carry weapons. And it's much easier to teach a grappler how to shoot and how to knife fight and how to, do anything than it is to teach somebody who's US DPA or whatever those defensive pistol things are, to teach people who just shoot, to bring them in and teach them how to do jujitsu with a gun. It's hard. It's a lot harder. The learning curve is a lot more drastic. So I would say, if you're not grappling, you should start. You should find. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's sport focused Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or it's self-defense focused Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or it's catch wrestling, Judo. Start learning how to grapple, and you can, as you can figure out, like, where do I need to learn how to incorporate a weapon, and you can then come to, like, what works groups and what, like, I offer some seminars that regard weapons grappling. When you come to the courses, you'll be coming with more, and you can find your information, of course. I think grappling is a priority for people who carry. So I think that would be my biggest piece of advice. I'd spend more time on the mat than I would, on the shooting range. Not, which is actually the exact opposite of what most law enforcement people do, right? I mean, not to sidetrack it, but most law enforcement, at least here in the States, they spend more time on the ranges than they do on the mats. But yet they go hands-on with people more than anything else. So when it comes to a civilian, it's even, I think it's important.
I would absolutely agree. There's no point getting your pistol taken away from you, have someone shove it up your ass, pull the trigger, throw, go click.
Yeah.
And even just the basics of how do I break a Russian tie out, right? Like you grab my wrist and right, and it's my weapon side. How do I pop that free so I can get back to trying to hide the pickle?
And if you look, for example, just how to get up off the ground properly, right? Like you fall down on the ground. Well, I've posted recently 2 videos where the protagonist, we could say, fell to the ground. There's that one road rage one where it's arguable who's the protagonist and who's the defender, but or who's the attacker. But getting up off the ground properly is something you're going to learn when you take fundamental Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu classes, because the idea is to safely get back up to your feet. And in the one road rage video, the guy didn't do it properly, which led to not being able to effectively manage the space. Because if you stand up properly, you can effectively manage the space while you do it, which is like sort of go to a callback. That's my iron law number 3, effectively manage the space. So if you can't stand up properly, yeah, sure, great, you got back to your feet. But now this dude's on your back and he's got his arm around your neck and he's starting to strangle you. So, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of value that can come out of just a little bit of jiu-jitsu. It's very powerful.
One of the things that I've noticed in the industry is people become very, very weapons focused. And the problem with that for me is that, well, first of all, stabbing somebody or shooting somebody doesn't necessarily stop them as quick as you want it to anyway. But you wind up taking a situation that was a shoving match where someone's yarmulke might get knocked off, and now all of a sudden you're spilling them on the pavement, where it's just not necessary to create a permanent solution to a very temporary problem. And Jocko Willenick was asked, what's the superpower? And he said, grappling, I guess. And what I've noticed, being in a few Donnybrooks and stuff like that over the years himself.
Don't you have to lose an eye to be in a Donnybrook?
You might think that, but
I thought that was the definition. Somebody's got to lose an eye for it to technically be considered a Donnybrook. But
I have both mine, so clearly okay, right. I won. Right. But just knowing 3 weeks worth of high school wrestling or jiu-jitsu, I mean, and that guy knows nothing. It turns into pretty quick. It's like fighting your dad when you were 10, right? Like you just don't know anything or what to do when that guy knows a little bit about grappling. You don't know anything. And so I would suggest like that allows you to equalize and control a situation. And from surviving that third fight that Tony Blauer talks about, that really allows you to not have to turn that into a situation that can turn to a great deal of civil liability, especially in the rather litigious society that you live in.
Yeah. It's to learn about prevention and avoidance, all of those things. Those are really important skills. I obviously I specialize in the moment where, things go hands-on. That would probably be where I spent the majority of my time developing expertise. Although over the last several years, I've acquired proficiency, and I'm still working on all the other areas of prevention and avoidance to a high level, hopefully. But what I like a lot about grappling is that it is a continuum. It is a force continuum in itself, and that it's a dial. And for instance, one of the things that I teach in regards to escaping a headlock, I can escape different types of headlocks based on their severity, and that's going to dictate how I respond to those headlocks. So somebody wants to, I use a drunk cousin analogy at a wedding. I'm there with my new girlfriend, and this guy, this relative, he comes up to put his arm around my neck, and he's going to pull me in and give me a noogie like he always did when we were little, but he was bigger. He's going to embarrass me in front. He's drunk. The drunk relative is going to embarrass me. I can defend that headlock with jiu-jitsu, and nobody's going to know that I did anything. I'm going to use a framing technique that stops everything that he does. That's a very low level on the force continuum, but all I'm doing is structurally preventing his headlock pull into a noogie. I'm not going to spill my wine. I'm not going to get my hair messed up. I'm not going to get embarrassed. But then we can take that all the way down into a headlock on the ground where he's pulling out his knife, and his buddy's coming over with his steel toes. Like, now we've got a much more serious situation. But it's a headlock all the same. Because of grappling, I can choose to deal with it in different ways that a striker can't, or a person who relies only on a weapon or a tool cannot. Right? I can make this painless, or you know what? I can incorporate a strike as well. I can incorporate a tool as well. But I have other options. I am a true force continuum.
I 100% agree. What is the advice that you would give to yourself in your 20s? If you could go back in a time machine and say, "Hey, kid," what would you say?
Focus more on yourself. Stop chasing all these women. It was, let me see, early 20s, getting out of the military. And, I started school late. So I was one of those old man freshmen, one of those veteran freshmen, which aren't so uncommon nowadays. But back then, trying to do that, just really didn't know what I wanted. So I would say probably giving myself advice in my 20s is a little too late, but but a little bit more focus and paying attention to mental health is an issue that I wish I would have done a little bit sooner, because I was having some issues back then that I just shrugged off. And I'm learning about them now that, like I talked about earlier, there probably were some symptoms of the condition of high functioning autism, maybe some depression, maybe some PTSD from some of my experiences in life. And I think being honest with myself and recognizing that I could have used some help back then, I wish I would have taken that. So be honest with your mental health and work hard to find focus, and try to take care of yourself a little bit better. I was a little bit, I was pretty wild back in my 20s. So there was a lot going on. I didn't really settle down for a while. So that would be a little bit more of it, focus, take care of myself, pay attention to the mental health and do something about that. Those would be my 20 advice for my 20-year-old self.
That's wonderful. I think it's one of those things that we should all hear, and focus more on self-development, care less about what other people think, care less about chasing the women around. Possibly something that I could stand to hear myself, but it's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
And then finally, Jason, what quote do you find yourself reflecting on regularly? What quotes on your screensaver, or like a basic white girl do you have scrawled across the door or the wall that you see all the time?
Wow.
or something you find yourself reflecting on regularly, or you have posted up in the gym and you're like, that's the business.
I'm one of those guys that it's easy for me to collect those sorts of quotes, you know. And I think if you start collecting them, they begin to blend and they lose value. You know, it's like you'll save a Instagram post from Jocko, or you'll save an you'll save a post from, you know, Stoic Daily. You know, I love Marcus Aurelius. You know, I love currently I own the Audible book, but I haven't started listening to it yet. But Jordan Peterson, 12 Rules of Life. I'm very excited to get into that. I listen to a lot of what he puts out on YouTube and whenever he's a guest on Rogan. Um, I like I like kind of where he's going. Can't say one side or the other if I wholeheartedly believe. I love quotes from Jack Donovan. Uh, I mean, you name it.
The way of men. Yep.
Yes. You know, and Violence is Golden, and Becoming a Barbarian. You know, those books, those essays. To you know, I love what some of the things that my instructor, my sensei, Saulo Ribeiro, you know, his philosophy. He's famous for a line, but I've actually heard it said from his lips. You know, he said it to me personally. You know, in regards to jujitsu and just combat in general. This applies to combat in general, and what Saulo says is, if you have to think, you'll be late. Right, regarding timing, right? You'll be late. So if you have to think, you'll be late, and if you're late, you'll have to muscle. And if you use muscle, you'll get tired. And if you get tired, you'll die. And, you know, to die in jiu-jitsu is to tap, right? Tapping is a symbolic death on the battlefield. If we were battling and I had that strangle on you, I'm keeping it until you're dead. You know, that's the symbolic death. So, you know, that's Saulo's. That always weighs heavily when I roll. A new one that I've recently stumbled across in my studies that is something I'm mulling over in my head is from David Rodin, and it comes out of his book War and Self-Defense. And I'm kind of twisting it so it fits in the first person, but it basically says, you know, my goal is to strive to become a person of who is a morally appropriate object of violence. And I'm mulling that over and what that means to me right now. To become a morally appropriate object of violence. That fascinates me, and what that means philosophically. And he is a philosopher, so you know, that's where I'm at.
There is a if you're into it sounds like you're into the philosophy side of things. There's a guy who we interviewed, actually our first podcast, by the name of Quintus Curtius, and he actually has quite a few translations to his name, some works. He's a pretty interesting character, and really likes to get into that aspect as well. There's also a book that you might really enjoy called, it's Warrior King Magician Lover. I may be getting that order wrong, and it talks with the 4 Jungian archetypes and what it is when they manifest positively, and what it is, you know, when they're not maturely manifested, and kind of really along the lines of some of what you just said. But that can wind up turning into quite the rabbit hole to go down.
For sure.
Jason, I really appreciate your time, and thank you very much. And we're gonna be in touch. I want you to stay on the phone,
sure.
so that we can get a hold of you.
Yeah.